Double boot, double trouble. In each episode of Survivor 48, we have been analyzing the edit to predict what will happen later in the season. And this week, I got not just one boot prediction correct, but both boot predictions correct. That is 4 in a row, baby! So, double the boot means double the analysis, as I bring in a friend of mine from the Edgic community to play a little bit of good cop, bad cop, and provide some unique perspective on the analysis to hopefully keep the prediction streak alive. We are joined here today with a good friend who has kept track of some, confessionals and Edgic stuff over the course of the season. Here to give a little bit of new insight, Josiah, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, North.
All right, awesome. So we're going to talk about general thoughts on the episode and kind of how we think this is going in terms of the Edgic today. And then we're going to talk about the ratings for every player and then contender rankings and then analysis for the predictions for the future of the season. So first off, let's just talk about general thoughts about this episode, especially, related to, how we thought things might be going and whatnot. I think that this episode, now this was shockingly a big win for me. I predicted last week, I said Say and Cedrek would be voted out this week. And immediately after I finished, I thought I was totally wrong. And I was shocked to be proven right. So I'm curious, who did you think would be voted out this week?
I don't know if I had specific predictions on that, but they presented it very clearly at the start of the episode that it was Say, Cedrek, and Mitch who were on the outs. Mm-hmm. So I'm not totally shocked by it. That said, I think the episode and its heavy editing with both Mitch and Shauhin made me think that both of them were more in trouble than Say and Cedrek up until the vote.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, this was a huge episode for both Mitch and Shauhin. I'm very curious to see how that ends up affecting, predictions and contenders for the future.
Totally.
But yeah, I was shocked by that, especially since, now I've been saying throughout the course of the season that I've thought that Vula's pretty much been dead in the water. I've really never, Vula's been out of it. Even when they were the craziest tribe, they were still getting what I felt was the least focus of the three tribes. And so this doesn't surprise me that this is where we ended up. But it is a little shocking that we came to such an anticlimactic end between this kind of Vula relationship. And Mary, the only Vula left in the game, had 0 confessionals this episode, if we look at the confessional charts here. So, I mean, things are looking rough for the old green tribe this season.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I was telling my friends and other people who watch the show how last week I was the most interesting part of the season for me, and I know this is totally subjective, was the Vula dynamic between Mary, Cedrek, and Say. After last episode, I was super interested in where that was going, with Say voting for Cedrek seemingly just out of spite after Cedrek had tried to build a bridge with her, and how Mary was not at all excited to see Say at the merge, even though Say really did seem to want to work with Mary. I was this whole dynamic is so interesting. None of them really trust each other, but I'm hoping that they last a little bit longer and are able to work together. And obviously that all fell apart this episode. So personally, I'm a bit disappointed. I love Say. I think she was the biggest character of the entire pre-merge. And while I don't think Cedrek was as big of a character, he totally dominated the pre-merge. He basically dictated all of the votes from the original Vula tribe. And so to see him go out here is a little bit surprising, because it makes it seem like the pre-merge and the post-merge of this season are kind of totally disparate and do not impact each other. And so, yeah, I don't really know what that means for editing, but it feels weird to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's an interesting circumstance, because that's just kind of how the season went. But I think even at the time when I was looking at the pre-merge, I was looking at the vote when Thomas went out, and it felt like the lead up to that vote and like the focus that tribe was getting felt so much bigger than
Mm.
really anything in the Vula. Even though, like, you know, Vula had some pretty crazy councils on the original Vula, I still felt like, oh, they're setting up, like, whoever comes out of the Thomas Council is going to be, like, important later on. Whereas with Vula, I felt like every time it was kind of like, okay, well, Say's obviously a very big character, but, like, Cedrek was, like, running things and, like, doing all this crazy stuff, but was not getting the most screen time in the cast. And so I think it's just like they kind of had to under edit a lot of people on that Vula tribe a little bit because of they just really didn't end up going very far. And I'm very curious what that is going to mean for Mary moving forward, since I would not have predicted Mary to be the last one standing of Vula. I said way back in week 2 that I thought Say was gonna Stephanie LaGrossa this thing and be the last one standing from her tribe. And I guess that's Mary now, but it's an interesting circumstance for that tribe. And I feel like, especially in terms of a disaster tribe in the new era, we haven't seen this kind of like total decimation like we have with this tribe as much. So it's interesting.
Yeah, no, it reminds me in a lot of ways of Lulu. Just like I think at the time Lulu was like breaking some record for like lowest average placement, and Emily only made it to the final 7, and she was the last one there. I wouldn't
Yeah.
be shocked if Mary goes around 7. But yeah, no, I'm honestly mostly surprised because Say her edit was so dominant. Like I think she broke some kind of record the first
Yeah.
couple episodes. And even like throughout the rest of the pre-merge, she was very, very present. And so for her to go out in this specific position is surprising to me, because I think in the past the show's kind of made it that this person who just misses the jury gets a kind of understated edit because they don't want people to feel like, oh wow, like this person should have deserved to be there. I'm just remembering last season Tiana. I know in the past it's happened before that. But Say gets this like over the top edit from start to finish. And I don't know. I didn't like that move from the players, but we'll see what happens from all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think because last week I had actually predicted Cedrek would be the pre-juror and Say would be the juror. And that was mostly because of that reason that you're saying, especially like with Tiana and I think with other people. Like I know I look at like Sifu in 45 was like a very big character, but very under edited for a character that big. And so that does seem to be the trend with that final pre-juror. I think like to try to reconcile that, I think that they specifically under edited. I felt like last episode Charity was, you know, fairly under edited compared to other people, and then obviously Cedrek has been under edited compared to what he could have been. So maybe that was kind of them trying to balance that out a little bit by having the people going out around Say to be under edited so that she could still have that big edit. But I do think that like once Say got voted out in this episode, I thought it was like, okay, it has to be Cedrek next, because like to do in a double boot, you do not want to send out 2 people that have been like really big narrators of the season so far. And it's like if we lose Say and Shauhin in one episode, that's a big blow to like the edit of the season, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
So that was kind of how I predicted going, even though it did feel like it was really going towards Shauhin. Yeah, it was interesting episode. So anyways, let's let's talk more about each person individually in the ratings, and then we can go from there. So first we got to start off, of course, with our fallen soldiers, Say and Cedrek. We got to do a rating for Say. Now, last week, I talked about last week. I think it was last week or the week before that I was really struggling with the ratings. So I'm really happy to have someone here to help me a little bit, perhaps in giving some perspective on the ratings, because sometimes it's difficult. So, what are we feeling for Say here? What are we feeling this episode was like for Big Say? Such a big character, one of the most consistent edits we've seen. Nothing below a complex personality all season. Nothing below a 3 visibility.
Yeah. My initial thought here is actually the same rating as last week, CPN 3.
Yeah.
Um, I think she got a pretty middle of the road edit as far as like visibility, maybe even a CPN 2. I don't know exactly how many confessionals she got, but it felt like for her, for this being her exit, it was pretty unceremonious.
Hmm.
But she did get, some complex edit when it came to the strategy on that split tribe. And we got the perspective that she thought people like Chrissy were working with her, that she thought she could trust Chrissy, and ultimately none of that worked. Um, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of where my head is at the moment. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think that's a great move. I think I mean I feel like because of the double boot, I think inherently, the attention is going to be divided a little bit more. But I think that Say was still clearly a presence in the episode, uh, and we heard her talking about being a cat with 9 lives, and how at the beginning we heard her talking about how she threw the vote on Cedrek to get her
That's
lick
true.
back.
That's true.
So
Yeah, there's actually
I
a lot more moments than I was thinking of now. You're right.
yeah. So I think she had her moments. So I would say I think honestly I think that yeah, same as last week. Probably. Although I'm trying to think, this felt like a less negative episode for Say
Mm,
than usual. I felt like we saw. I was actually a little bit surprised that it was leading towards a Say boot because it reminded me a little bit of actually this episode 4 where we saw
yeah.
Mary talking about how she actually respected Say as a game player and she was kind of getting that like positive gameplay content. We got that
Yeah.
I think specifically from Shauhin this episode, talking about how he actually really respected Say as a fierce game player.
Yeah, but his that whole confessional was like, "I really respect her, but I don't wanna work with her at all in this game." And, like, that's where it ended, so, like, I feel like that's not positive. That
Well, no,
said, you're
I'm
also
not thinking positive. I'm just wondering. I'm wondering if we go with a mixed here on this one.
mixed. Okay, yeah, actually, I could see mixed. Because, like, even just, like, strategically, the edit shows that she was able to hide that Cedric vote, that no one was able to really track it to her. And, like,
Hmm.
when that happened, I was like, "Oh, this is, like, a good move for her. It's gonna help her in the game." Obviously, that didn't work out, but yeah, I mean, you're right. I think it's more of a mixed.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I felt like this was uh, a leaning more positive episode, and I think specifically that Shauhin and Say interaction was so interesting to me. And so to see her go out without really any payoff of her interactions with Shauhin in this episode or with Mary in the previous episodes. That was definitely a surprising result for her. But we
Yeah, the
cannot give.
split tribal does that though. Like,
I know.
maybe you don't want to blame the show, but like, I think this could have been a better episode if they got rid of that twist.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, I think last season, I think it worked out great the way they did it, and I think we saved like the double boot for like the pre-finale or whatever,
Yeah.
part one of the finale, and I think that worked a lot better.
Yep.
Um,
Same.
especially having less people in game, and I think that was a 2-hour episode. Was it? Maybe.
Yeah. No. No. It was 2 2-hour episodes. It was good.
So,
Let's move on to Cedric. What are your thoughts?
I mean, let's see. We heard Cedrek be worried about the random vote that he got in the previous council. We heard him, talk a little bit about uh he's not sure who he can trust, but he thinks that they're going for Shauhin. I felt like Cedrek has had a fairly understated edit over the course of the season, and I felt like this was still a fairly understated edit by Cedric terms. Um, so I'm feeling honestly a pretty low visibility here.
Hmm.
Um, I'm a little bit torn. Are you leaning complex or middle of the road here? You think?
I was thinking more middle of the road too.
Hmm.
I'm not sure how much of his edit was complex. I think his biggest moment was at the start of the episode where he's trying to find out who voted for him.
Hmm.
Um, but even that, I don't really remember seeing too much of like his personality through it.
Yeah, yeah. This felt like the least like personal based, especially since I feel like Cedric's edit has been really interesting in the sense that despite him being such like a crucial vote in so many councils, like the only scenes that he was really getting was like the scenes of him like crying and feeling bad about like
Hmm.
being bad at the challenges, and so he actually got a fairly personal edit
Yeah.
And so for this episode to kind of get none of any of that was surprising.
Yeah, actually, now that you're saying that though, like he failed at the challenge so bad, and like Jeff even like made fun of him on the bench. So like, is there any level of tone to this edit? Like, I don't know what the tone would be, but I feel like the show kind of went out of its way to kind of dunk on him a little bit.
I think Jeff did dunk on him. I felt like the dunking wasn't as bad as it's been in previous episodes. I think that at this point, it's just expected that Cedrek was going to do really bad at the challenge.
Yeah.
So I didn't feel like this was a super toneless episode, or I felt like this was a fairly toneless episode for Cedrek, especially since like the reasons why people said that they were voting him off was just he just wasn't on our tribe, so we're voting him off. Like that's not really, they weren't voting him off because they didn't like him or that
No.
the reason.
No. And again, the edit doesn't really show you like anything beyond that. I think there have got to be deeper reasons because I feel like everyone's a game player, so them just like doing an easy vote just because it's a split tribal doesn't exactly make sense to me. But like again, they don't really show Cedrek connecting with anyone outside of Say and Mitch, so it's just what ended up happening.
Yeah. Well, big send off for Cedrek and Say. Gotta give our flowers. Both of them brought so much entertainment so far to this season. I'm not surprised that this is where the edit ended up going for them in this placement, but we've had a great time with both of them so far in the season. And yeah, so we can hop up to the top of the list now and go down alphabetically for each person's ratings. Chrissy now at the top of the list alphabetically. And I was a little torn on Chrissy. I watched this episode twice in preparation. And at first I thought under the radar for Chrissy this episode. Because I feel like she always is. But
you love giving her the under the radar.
I love giving her the under the radar. I want to give her better, but it just is every time. But I believe, let's look at the confessional charts, because I think, she had 2 confessionals. I thought it was 1. That's not too bad.
No, she had definitely some presence, especially leading up to the vote. I feel like they showed, the conversation with her and Say, and then they showed her confessional talking specifically about Say versus Mitch. I thought, though, like, you can't really give her under the radar. I don't know how much of the Edgic is based on just confessionals, but, like, to think about her scene at Tribal, I'm like, that gives a totally different type of edit. So that's why I was also a little bit torn on how to categorize her. But I don't really know exactly the best way to do that. Maybe middle of the road mixed.
I agree, because that, like, upon rewatching it, I was like, oh, Chrissy, like, she had like not very much presence, I think, in the episode overall, but she did have that very big scene of her like throwing Mitch under the bus and talking to Say, and that was a pretty substantive scene. And then we do get that moment at Tribal where it was like, oh wow, she's like getting a lot of stuff here, and I almost think I've bumped up to wanting to give her a complex personality. Mostly because of that moment at Tribal. We hear so much of her thought process and not wanting the honor and integrity and whatever stuff, and wanting to take out the big guys. And I was, the way that people reacted to that was like, oh, like she's like popping off a little bit right now.
Yeah. Okay, actually, I feel that better. I think complex personality. Do you feel like there was tone, or was it just a complex personality for you?
See, that's where I'm interested, because I think that like those moments that she had in this episode are going to spell negativity for her in the future, is my prediction.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I don't know if we saw any like negativity on it in this episode. You know what I mean?
No one talked about Chrissy, so I don't know where the negativity would have come from, but I agree that they're kind of spreading some seeds now that that perhaps she is not going to work with the group as well. And you're thinking 2. Okay, yeah, 2 makes sense. 2 confessionals.
I think that like she was like not in the first half of the episode really at all.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, for David, do you have any strong thoughts on David's edit this week?
I would say this was one of the lower key episodes for David, I guess, but like a low key episode for David is still a lot.
Yeah, no, he brings a definitely a different kind of personality, especially at the challenge. Like that's the only moment from David that's really sticking out with me. I only watched the episode once,
Mhm.
but I can't remember any of his specific confessionals this week. I do remember though him like flexing and like putting on this big show in this showdown between him and Joe. And so I don't really know when the editors put scenes like that how they're supposed to like make us feel, because I'm not loving this alliance with like David and Joe and all of these big masculine guys. Um, but I feel like the show is kind of presenting them as like the big alliance and the ones
Mhm.
that we should be caring about strategically and how they do in the game. So I don't know if there was any tone there, but I almost want to say this was an OTT episode just because of
I
the scene.
I think it was. I think yeah, because I feel like in terms of like David's like yeah his confessionals and whatnot didn't feel as substantial. I think we did see a little bit of him talking about you know that he said Cedrek is the only person that he wants to see go home. He said that very early in the episode, and that does end up happening. And we also saw him talk a little bit about his worry about Shauhin and Kamilla talking to him. So, but I do feel like that in a challenge once again, such a big thing for him. I I I don't. I think if it were OTT tone, I think it would be an OTT mixed at like I don't think it
Yeah,
was any one way or the other. But I kind of think it might just because I mean he was doing the smack talk, right?
yeah,
Which was maybe
yeah.
a little bit negative, but it was also like fun and people were like laughing about it.
Yeah, based on the vibe of the group there, no one took offense to anything. And yeah, I kind of think it was a toneless. Uh, I would just go regular OTT. Honestly, copy his week 5, but maybe he gets a 3.
I think I'd go 3. Yeah.
Um, but I don't know. I did kind of want to see more of your colors here, and you haven't used an OTT
I know I want to use an OTT
week.
mix. So that's should we just do it just for the sake of it?
I mean, it's up to you.
I'm
But I
I'm
think
I'm
realistically,
curious
it
about
was more like
next week's
OTT.
episode.
Yeah, yeah, probably in the future.
Because I think based on the preview, I think David is going to have a very interesting episode next week. So maybe he'll get an OTT mixed
Yeah, yeah,
next
maybe.
week. And maybe I'll come back and if I decide to change it, maybe we'll change it in the future. But we'll give him a flat neutral for now.
Okay, for
Eva.
Eva. Okay, so I don't really know about Eva this week. I don't think she was extremely present. I will say though, because I know sometimes you retroactively change scores. When you gave her a CPP for week 4, I thought that was really interesting because that was the week where I think she like started talking about how she doesn't like working with women, and people online were reacting to that a lot. And even though I don't know if that was like in the edit, I feel like that's been a through line, and especially this episode I saw Eva like gleeful to vote out to vote out another woman at her second tribal. And I feel like that is the storyline, especially with her at the end of that challenge, working like being the last woman standing with all these big buff guys, is like Eva and the guys. She's going to try to eliminate all the other women from the season. She doesn't want to work with any of them. And she thinks her best alliance is with these strong men.
Mhm,
And I know that's not necessarily negative, but I do think people are reacting negatively to that as far as like larger fan base.
mhm. I mean, I think that there is. I mean, there's definitely a difference in terms of how people react to the show and how the show is like portraying it, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think that uh yes, I think that that has been Eva's game, but I also think I don't think we've seen Eva say that she wants to get out the women. I think she said that she works with men and in her life that she's been in a lot of
yeah,
worked with a lot of men on teams and
yeah.
whatnot, and that's how she feels comfortable in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I also don't think that we haven't like seen anyone be like in the show like, oh, Eva, she's a woman hater, right?
No, that's true. That is true. But people are picking that up, and
Mhm,
I think like I don't know. I don't know your spaces online in the Survivor fandom, but I feel like people are bringing this up every single week.
mhm,
And like again, I follow Survivor Fact Checker, and I love that they do the like popularity polls.
mhm,
And Eva has not been at the top of the popularity poll because I think of these issues. Because I
mhm,
think otherwise they're presenting her in a super like sympathetic way. They're presenting her story with autism and her relationship with Joe. And I think overall there is still like a positive slant to Eva's edit, but I also think there's this like negative undercurrent. And even if she's not explicitly saying, I want to vote out all the women, she is saying, I want to be in an alliance and I want to work with men only.
mhm.
So
Yeah,
I
well,
don't
I mean,
know.
I did give her some mixed tone because I do know that she has had some negativity in there.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, last
but
week people were bringing up her name. I think that was your main reason for bringing her tone last week to a mixed.
mhm,
This week, again, sorry to detract from this specific week. I'm not sure if we saw enough of Eva to give her any of that.
mhm. Yeah, I think
I
that
would
this might
probably
be her
just say,
first toneless.
yeah, I think it's a toneless week. I think I'm gonna say middle of the road too, but I could be swayed if you feel like it's a complex personality.
I think this was a middle of the road episode for Eva. I believe she only had one confessional in the episode, although it was a fairly long confessional.
Yeah.
Um, I
So
think
do
she
we
still
even want to
felt like
give
a
her an
presence.
under the radar?
I considered it. I think a middle of the road too is good. I still felt like she had a presence in the episode, even if it wasn't super substantial. I think a middle of the road two toneless. I think that this was her most low key episode for sure of the
Yeah.
season.
And again, she did have the moment at the challenge. And so, yeah, I
That's true.
think I think all of the final four people who were in that challenge, they can't get an under the radar edit because there
Yeah.
was so much time devoted to that challenge and so much of a spotlight there.
Hmm.
For Joe, how are you feeling about Joe this week?
I think it's difficult because I felt like Joe was a big part of narrating that side of his alliance, or that side of the split
The
tribal.
split tribal, yeah.
And we saw him talking to Mitch on multiple occasions. And we also saw him at the challenge a lot, especially at like the end of the challenge. He gave kind of his speech on about his kids and doing it for them. So I think that although I wouldn't say like this was like the most complex episode for a character, I think I probably would give Joe a complex this episode,
Okay.
because I think we got just enough to give him a complex. Maybe a
Okay.
complex three toneless would be where I would lean. Do you have any thoughts
How
on that?
many confessionals did he end up getting? Because he didn't seem very present to me. He got three. Okay.
Three.
Yeah.
Which in
Interesting.
this episode we have a lot of ones and twos and
Yeah,
zeros.
no, that's
So
actually pretty present. I personally don't find Joe that captivating or interesting, so maybe that's why I tuned him out a little bit. But I know he's your guy, but
he's my guy, man. I've been riding for him. I've been trying.
but I don't know. I liked how last week you dropped him so far down your contender ranking and you gave him a middle of the road because that seemed more accurate to me. And honestly, this week seemed like a continuation of that. I
Yeah.
feel like his presence in the storyline was not super present. And like him talking about his kids, he talks about his kids like all the time. So I don't feel like that is a specific reason to give him the complex personality.
Mm.
But I will let you choose because this is your Edgic
Yeah,
ultimately.
I mean that's
So
interesting because I do feel like this felt like a very similar episode to last week to
yeah,
me. But I
same.
think the reason why I might want to bump him up is I think comparatively to other people,
Mm,
he actually did get more.
yeah.
Whereas last week he kind of was just one of the people. I felt like there was a little bit more spotlight on him this episode.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, for me, the only time I feel like he had the spotlight was him against David at the end of that challenge and then ultimately losing after almost an hour. And like, yeah, that is a big part of the episode and he talked about it a little bit, I think, at the beach afterward, but yeah, I'm cool with this. Let's move on to Kamilla, who I want to give an under the radar to this week,
Mm-hmm.
which I wasn't expecting that. I honestly, she was at the top of like my winner rankings 2 weeks ago, and now I'm not feeling that good about Kamilla. I know we're gonna get there later, but
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. This was a surprising episode for Kamilla for me. I feel like this was at least 2 episodes in a row where
yeah,
Kyle has taken the lead way over Kamilla
yep,
in the edit, which was very not where I expected the season to go.
same.
And I agree with you on the under the radar too. My one thought is like, is it negative based on her like
Mm.
telling that lie to David? It felt
Well, I
like
don't think it could be negative because they didn't show him like knowing it was a lie. I think
that's
maybe it
true.
will lead to negativity down the road, kind of like Chrissy. I was like, this looks like it is
Yeah,
bad strategic content, but not right now. Maybe next episode or after that.
yeah, yeah. I agree. Okay, so
Um,
yeah.
for Kyle, you've been giving him a lot of complex personalities. I think we might want to keep that.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm thinking probably a flat complex 3
Yeah, that's
for
what I
Kyle.
would go with as well.
Um, I think the thing about like Kyle and Camilla this episode is it was kind of painted like they were trying to get Shauhin out and then they failed to do so. So
Yeah.
maybe that's not necessarily negativity for the episode, but I do think like is that something that is going to be significant in the future? That's like they try to like was this supposed to be their shot and they missed,
Mm.
or was it just we need to put tension in the edit so we have to come up with something, you know?
I'm believing it's a second option, honestly. I think Cedrek was kind of like a, I don't know, unanimous vote out, and
Yeah.
people were kind of so on the train to get rid of him because he wasn't part of any alliance. But you're right. They did present this as an option, and they presented it specifically from the point of view of Kyle and Kamilla. So, um, I don't really know where that goes. I still think all three of them have a chance of winning, Kyle, Kamilla, and Shauhin.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, right now CP3 makes sense. And then Mary, we have to give her an under the radar just because she got no confessionals this week, which
Yep.
is sad. I love Mary. I think she's the most entertaining part of the cast. Every week that she has a confessional, I love it. I feel like they're giving Courtney Yates just like really funny, ironic kind of content. But this week, nothing. And I really hope we see more of her because she's the last Vula standing. And I feel like at the least she's got to talk about that, about making it
Mhm.
past Cedrek and say, and trying to find a crack in these big other tribes. But I don't really know where she stands strategically, so I don't feel great about her going forward as well.
Mhm. I think that Mary's longevity potential, I mean, we'll talk about her winner potential, but I think just even in terms of how far she'll go, I think is going to depend a lot on what we get next episode. I talked about last week how when Joe had 0 confessionals in episode 5, I was like, okay, he needs a really good episode next week to like keep him in viability. And then I was like, he
Yep.
kind of had a fine episode. It wasn't that great. Now compare that
Yes.
to Mitch, who I think last week I thought, okay, not a great episode for Mitch. He's going to need a lot next episode to bring him back up. And he got that. Like he exploded this
Oh
episode.
my God, he got so much content this week. I
So
mean,
I'm
the next
interested to
two.
see if which one Mary has next week.
Yeah, I'm interested too. With Mitch, I'm trying to think the best. I don't know if it was over the top, even though he had so much content. I think it was more complex personality positive, is what I would give him. But I don't know. It's up to you.
Yeah, that's true. Because we saw specifically Joe multiple times say, if we leave Mitch in too long, he's gonna win the game.
Yeah. It was almost winner edity because you were getting content not just about like Mitch where he was in the game, and it's final 12. It's not even like end game,
Yeah.
but people talking about him as if he's like an end game threat, as if he's a physical threat to win all these immunities. It was like it kind of, I don't know, came out of nowhere, and it was a lot of content. So I definitely want to give him at least a 4 in visibility, if not a 5. But again, I was leaning complex personality. But if you're not leaning that way, I want to hear it.
No, I agree. I definitely think that this was. I would go complex over the top. I think he did have a lot of visibility, but I think it was uh, a lot about like his positioning, and he talked about you know, being Coach G and how his kids are going to view him
Yep.
on the show and all
Yep.
that
Yep.
kind of stuff. So I don't think that he was like an oops over the top character. Uh, I think I might lean mixed for him this
Okay.
episode because we did see a lot of people talk about like we want to get him out, and he's kind of like
That's true. That's
on the
true.
bottom of all these alliances.
Yeah,
Um,
no, he is painted as the person who's still on the bottom now that Cedrek and Say are gone. So you're right. CPM probably makes more sense. And now that we're talking about his edit, I kind of feel like he doesn't have longevity in the game. At first, I was thinking there was potentially winner content, but now I'm thinking it seems like everyone out there is not working with him. He's on the bottom and he has some kind of threat level. So he's probably next to go if we're going to like
mhm.
predict things at the end.
Yeah.
Uh, Shauhin has an interesting edit too because he had a lot of content and a lot of his content was cocky. And he even said something about how he thought he was running the game, how he thought he was like the strategic force in the game. And like while that might be true, he was also in contention to go as far as the edit showed. Again, we don't know how real that Kyle Kamilla plan was, but I don't think that was like a particularly like positive or good edit for Shauhin, even though he had a lot of content. So I kind of want to give him a CPN.
Hmm. I think well because I feel like we got very similar stuff from Kyle. He also said, "Me and Camilla, we're running this game. We're the most
Mm.
underrated duo in this game." And I
Yeah,
feel
that's
like
true.
it's kind of pitting Kyle versus Shauhin. They both think they're
Mm.
in control. They both kind of want each other out. Um, I think I would go mixed on Shauhin maybe.
Okay.
Although I guess I don't know where the positivity comes from.
I
I
don't
think
feel
that
like there was any positivity, and he was on the chopping block. I would understand now that you've mentioned that because I forgot that about Kyle's episode. If you want to switch Kyle to a CPM because there was actually tone, but I feel like Shaheen's episode was purely negative, and not like over the top negative. But you gave Thomas like three negative tones in a row, and I don't feel like Thomas's at like part of the season was at all negative. Maybe I was a little biased to him as a character, but like I thought he was just getting fun content.
I mean,
And so I
negative
think
does not
Shauhin is
necessarily mean like
yeah,
bad.
yeah,
Negative is like
yeah, I
fun
know.
miserable.
But I feel like it's probably pretty similar to whatever week 2 or whatever of Thomas, where he's
Mhm.
like, let's get rid of Star while she has this advantage and she can't open it. It's like Shauhin is trying to play the game, and he's trying to play the game almost from a cutthroat angle, and he is also viewing himself as a strategic threat and as like someone to beat. And I think that's dangerous when you're presenting yourself like that when there are 12 people left in the game.
Mhm.
And so for that reason, I wanted to give him a negative tone.
Okay, I'm gonna throw in the debate here a little bit. I
Okay.
feel like I don't know if anyone talked positively about Shauhin, but I think I would want like I would lean into the mix because I do agree there was a lot it was a lot of negativity, but I think specifically in terms of what we got from Shauhin himself, in some ways it was cocky, but in other ways I think especially earlier in the episode we did see like him, you know, Mitch going to him and Say going to him and Cedrek going to him and him talking about, you know, how he's trying to have more genuine conversations with him. I think again I go back to that conversation with Say where he's
Yeah.
like a lot of people don't know how to talk to Say, but I'm trying to like, you know, be more honest with her. I think she was someone that would respect honesty rather than
Okay.
tricking her, and I felt
Yeah.
like that was good for him.
It was good for him, but again, that whole conversation was strange because he ended it with saying like, "But I don't want to work with her at all." And if you think about it, like him presenting like a lot of people don't want to work with her because she's a difficult personality is a little bit condescending. It comes off a little bit like, "Oh, you're the unwanted person that no one is actually working with or talking to, and I'm going to be the one to take it upon myself to talk to you." And I'm like, ugh, I don't know. Maybe I just don't
But
like
I
him
think
that much. But like, I don't feel like that conversation really presented like his strategic chops because she's out of the game now. So where did
mhm,
that lead?
that's
Nowhere.
true. It did not lead anywhere. But I do think it was showcasing. I felt like that scene was showcasing. It was giving positivity in terms of how Shauhin was playing the game, that he was in the middle and he was giving Say a little bit more. And I felt like what his point he was trying to make in that scene was, if me and Say started on the same tribe, I would have been working with Say. I don't have problems with Say.
Yeah, that's true.
It's just I already have alliances and I know where the like vibe of the season is heading, and so I need to play based on what I've been the cards I've been dealt. And so unfortunately, as much as I think that he was like, I would like to save Say and work with Say, but I can't.
Yeah, that's true. All right, this is your channel. I'm gonna let you have that CPM. And if the comments say that I'm actually right, I will take that as a win.
Hey, I would love to hear what people have to say in the comments. But yeah, I'm thinking maybe a 4 on visibility. I think it was less than Mitch, but it still felt like a lot.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I think also I particularly want to give him the mixed based on thoughts I'm going to have when we get to the Contender Rankings.
Okay. We're almost there. Let's just get through Star.
So, Star, are we looking at it under the radar or middle of the road here for Star?
Did she get 1 or 2 confessionals?
1, I believe.
Yeah, 1. I feel like you have to give someone who gets 1 confessional under the radar. And I don't even remember what the confessional was, so it wasn't like a super prominent one.
It was actually an interesting confessional. It was not like really had a lot of complexity to it, but it was who's saying like, I don't want to vote out someone, just vote people out. I want to vote people so that I get to the end. I want to be it was something like, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's something about like her wanting to be at the end and she wants to win, so she's got to like decide who she wants on the jury so she can win, something like that.
Oh yeah, I do vaguely remember that. Yeah,
and it was kind of like a generic speech. I feel like it wasn't like, it's something that we've heard before.
Yeah, I mean, everyone probably says things like this, and so that said, they did keep her in the episode. They did not keep any married confessionals in the episode.
Yeah.
I think, under the radar 2, maybe just 1. I don't know. She wasn't really present at that challenge or really much of those camp scenes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that is an interesting confessional. And especially after I feel like Star's had like 2 pretty hot weeks of like coming into her own and having this like interesting exchange with the rest of the tribe, with the Eva idol. This is a cooling down episode for Star. And I don't know what that means in terms of her longevity, because I was feeling really good about Star before this week, even though I know she had a very quiet pre-merge. Mm-hmm. But like now I'm like, I don't know. She's probably still very periphery.
Yeah. I think that as far as under the radar episodes go, I think that this was a pretty good under the radar episode for Star. But yeah. So let's hop into the contenders.
Let's do it.
We lost Cedrek and Say. Neither of them were particularly high contenders in my rankings before. No. I feel like we have a pretty easy bottom spot here that we're not going to disagree on, right?
Yeah, Chrissy's going at the bottom. To be fair, if you look at your past weeks, you've had Chrissy on the very bottom for 3 previous weeks. This will be the 4th week. Mm-hmm. So maybe she is the cockroach that will keep surviving at the bottom tier. Maybe she'll make it to the end.
I've been saying that I think Chrissy is very under the radar, but I've never been out on Chrissy's longevity.
That's true. That's a different thing altogether.
Yeah, I feel like, her content has been fine, even if minimal, and I could see her being like, especially like that, sometimes that like 5th place spot is someone that like is kind of like we don't see very much of, maybe like a Mama Julie or something like that.
That's true. All right, I think we got to move Star down below Mitch this week. That's my belief system.
I agree. Hot take.
I don't think Mitch is winning, but I think he got so much content that would suggest he has a chance to win if he's able to make it that far.
I think somebody got the goose egg this episode.
Oh, so you want to bring Mary all the way down. Okay.
I kind of think Mary has like...
Actually, that's true.
she had a bad, the first few episodes were bad, and then she's gone even down. She went up and then has gone down again, and she's on a downward trajectory.
Yeah, you're right. I don't think Mary has at all the winning potential on this season. I love Mary. She's my favorite left in the game at this point, but she can't win. And especially, like, we don't need to talk, like, too meta here, but, like, this tribe, this merge tribe has all these big, broy guys, and I don't see how a woman is going to win this game. And we're going to get to Kamilla in a bit, but I thought for a while Kamilla had a chance to win this game, but just seeing the makeup of this potential jury, I don't think Kamilla can win at the end. I don't, unless she's at the end with Chrissy and Mary, like... Yeah. And so, anyway, yes, Mary down makes more sense. And then
Mary feels very similar to Saul last season for me. Like a super lovable character, but is pretty under the radar, like not going to win.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. I think, can we put Star next?
Yep, I agree. Star next.
All right. And I know you've been keeping this top 6 so separate from the bottom. I'm trying to see... Is there a way that Mitch makes it into the top 6 this week or not? I don't really see it, to be honest. I don't need to convince myself that he belongs there.
No, I agree, because that was a big debate, because I was like, this was like this was about as good of a week as Mitch could have possibly asked for.
Yes.
But I just feel like the 6 above Mitch have just been so much better consistently that I feel like he has skyrocketed above the 3 below him.
Yeah.
But I think I'm gonna need to see more from him moving forward if I want to break that top 6.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like you're gonna try to default Kyle at 6, but I'm gonna convince you Kyle does not belong at 6, especially after this week.
Mm-hmm.
Are you trying to put Kyle at 6 again?
I'm not. I felt like this week was enough, especially since we saw him get the focus again over Kamilla, that I felt like he probably does deserve a spot in the 5. My dilemma is I don't know who I boot down to 6, but I'm willing to hear your argument.
Yeah, and I am finding this tricky. Again, I don't think Kamilla has a chance of winning right now, even though she had that really good episode with the Thomas boot. I think that might just be a blip. And I think what they're presenting with Kamilla, because I thought they were kind of showing it as her idea to lie to David, is that some of this sneakiness is going to get back to her and she's going to get a downfall pretty soon. That's kind of why I want to drop her, but I know dropping from 2 to 6 is pretty drastic. That said, I feel like, again, just looking at the makeup of this, I don't know her path forward. Like, obviously she's trying to work with Kyle, but do they really have like the rest of their original tribe as numbers? I don't really know. I don't really know how this whole thing is working. But I'm pretty sure Kamilla is not part of David's plan, because his plan is all these strong guys. And there seems to be no tension still to break up Joe and Eva. And I think that also needs to happen for Camilla's game to be put in a better spot. She needs to pick up the lower people, the people who have no alliances, Star, Mary, Chrissy, Mitch. She needs to pick up all those people and work with them. And I don't see that happening at this point. So my suggestion would be to move Kamilla out. However, if we're presenting a second alternative, I could also see moving David down. Again, David gets a lot of content, but I feel like a lot of it is over the top and this kind of comedic angle of like, he's the goofy guy. And I don't see at this point that David could win, even though he's getting consistent content and he does have this big alliance at this point. So those are the 2 people that I feel like belong at 5 and 6, and I don't really care either spot.
Yeah, I agree. I think those were definitely 2 options I consider a lot. I think David, I've been saying, I think David has got to be in the finals, and he gives so much losing finalist to me. Or maybe like a fire-making loser or something like that. Yeah. I feel like it's difficult because in my heart of hearts, I just feel like, can David actually win the game? But I'm like, but he does have such a visible edit.
I don't feel like he can normally win the game. I also think, like, if this is the makeup of the jury and he gets Joe and Eva and Kyle and all these people that value strength, and he makes it to the end and he makes a case like no strong guy ever makes it to the end, I feel like all these people would give him the vote. And that's why I'm like, I don't know if, I don't know. But again, I would put David and Kamilla at 5 and 6.
I think Kamilla. It's interesting because I feel like we have not gotten to see a lot of Camilla's relationships outside of Kyle for a long time. We saw a little
Yes.
bit of that connecting with Shauhin and Joe. We haven't heard Kamilla talk about either of them at all since that scene. And
Totally.
I have no idea who else she's connected to at all in the game other than
Yeah.
Kyle and kind of those two. I think I'd maybe go David at 6, Kamilla at 5. You feel
Okay.
like that's all right?
That's fine with me. I bet your comment section will not like us moving these people so much.
I think that like I feel like David has better potential for longevity, and this could change around at any
But this
point.
isn't about longevity.
But,
This is about like winning potential, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Now this is interesting because I'm not sure how much to move these four where they're currently at. But that said, I don't think Shauhin had a good episode. I think he had a very present episode, but I think it was very tinged with negativity. And so keeping him at 1, and I know I'm kind of skipping a couple steps here, but like that feels a little bit wrong to me. So, and I don't know if Joe, Eva, or Kyle had such a good episode to move to 1. You've had Kyle below the 5 the whole time, so I'm okay if you want to keep Kyle at 4, so it's not such a massive jump. But honestly, at this point, personally, I think Kyle has the greatest potential to win the game. I think he's positioned himself in a very middle position between different alliances that all want to work with him. His name has not come up yet. And I think that kind of person typically wins the new era. It's someone who's not super flashy, who's not super like, bringing the alliance together, but is an important number. And even though I don't feel like we've gotten much personal content from him, I think if you look back, like I don't know how much personal content we got of Rachel last season. Yeah. Like there have been winners that don't get that much personal content. Their content is all strategic, and I think that just might be Kyle's edit.
I agree, and I've said the same thing about Shauhin. I think Kyle and Shauhin are getting very similar edits in a lot of ways, to be honest. It's difficult. I feel like it's weird to bump Kyle all the way up to 3. But I have been saying for a long time I have been in on Loggy, and I kind of like the idea of a Loggy top 3 right now. Even though I feel like Joe should not be that high.
I don't think Joe should be that high. I don't think he's like, especially, okay, just going back to the Joe edit for a little bit. You were right that he got that goose egg. You dropped him a little bit, but I thought you should have dropped him further because the episode that he got the goose egg was the episode with Eva's big episode. And there was no content from him. You would have thought that was the perfect spot to put in a confessional of Joe where he's like, I didn't know that I was going to do this, but I had to leave my tribe. I had to go comfort her. She means so much to me in this game. You got none of that. You only got him actually doing it. And in a 90-minute episode, I feel like that is like totally not an excuse to not give someone a confessional there.
Yeah.
So I want to drop Joe to 4 because like he doesn't deserve to go any higher than that. He was at 5 last week.
I think I have to agree. I still think that Joe had a really good premiere and like really good first few episodes that keep him in like contender, for sure.
I think you've also been blinded by your love of Joe.
I love Joe. But I do think also that as far as that episode where he got the Zero confessionals, a lot of people said online that like the best Zero confessional episode of all time. He was still in the episode a lot. And we didn't check back in with Loggy or with New Vula at all after the challenge.
Yeah.
And I think there's just no time in the episode. My dilemma is that we didn't hear from him the next episode all that much about it, which is why I wouldn't want to move him up too much. But I feel like he's still in the mix.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's fair. And I guess at this point, Kyle will be 3. I can't convince you to put him any higher, which is fine.
I'm not going to put Kyle any higher than that. For a long time, I've really expected Kamilla to be the main of that duo, but Kyle is seeming to be the main one of that duo.
He's
I
emerging now.
he's blossoming out. I feel like
Are-
with Kyle and Shauhin, we've heard from both of them multiple episodes, and especially in this one, how they're doing so well in the game and they're in the middle ground and they got stuff. To me, I feel like, and I felt like this for a while, that Kyle feels more like the one that's gonna have like the downfall. Even though I do think that he's in a better position, and I agree that Kyle has been playing very well. It just feels like he's been like, me and Kamilla are the most secret duo in the game, and we're scheming circles around everyone, basically. Whereas I think Shauhin, I don't know if we really got that until this episode specifically. And so I know you talked about that this was not a good episode for Shauhin. To me, this solidified it. Shauhin is, in my mind, absolutely number one contender. I felt like this was a very similar episode to Rachel last season in episode 7, that had such a blossoming, so much content, so much told from Shauhin's perspective in the way that Rachel did at the same time. And I really felt like the way the episode was going, I was like, either Shauhin is going to go out now, and if he doesn't, like, this is major for his edit, because we saw him talk with so many people, talk about how his position in the game and his strategy and relationships with so many different people. I was like, if Shauhin isn't the first juror, this is a major episode for him moving forward.
That's true.
Amount of content.
I actually do see what you're saying now with the Rachel comparison, especially like I didn't really like him in episode 4, and obviously you dropped him a lot that episode because Thomas got blindsided, and it looked like Shauhin also got blindsided. But that reminded me a lot of last season when Annika was voted out, and they protected Rachel a lot in the edit. And for a while last season, I didn't think Rachel could win because they presented her as like someone who was completely out of the loop, who lost her best ally at that point in the game. And there was like very little content from her that episode. And I was expecting there to be more about like losing Annika and not knowing where to trust like Sam and Sierra and all this stuff. But there really wasn't much of that. And so I think the edit sometimes likes protecting the winner by presenting them not as negative as they could in a situation like that. And also then presenting them like much better down the line when they're like in danger, because like again, how much was Shauhin actually in danger this episode? Probably not that much, but they presented him as like the alternative, and again, the show loves to show people who could have been voted out actually win.
And so I feel like Shauhin and Eva have both got that a lot throughout the season.
So you've convinced me. Shauhin can stay at number 1, Eva at number 2. This makes sense. Also, Eva didn't have that great of an episode, so I'd feel weird bringing her all the way up to 1.
Yeah, Eva didn't have a great episode, so bumping her up to 1 would be weird. But I do think that she has been surprisingly consistent.
She's been consistently in the top echelon. She's actually every single week you've put her in the top 5.
She was same 6 with Joe. This week, but
oh wait, she's sick. What?
In week 3, she was 6. But yeah.
Oh wait, never mind. You're right.
But yeah, she's been right up there. And this was again kind of similar to Kyle and Kamilla. Early on, I predicted that Joe would be the main person in the Joe Eva dynamic, but I feel like that has really flipped.
And now you flipped it, yeah. All right, here's your top 5. A little bit of shake up there, but I think it all makes sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, I think that Shauhin has been such a narrator, and he's been kind of like a toneless narrator, but we've seen him talk so much in moments where he doesn't need to be talking. You know, I'm trying to remember what happened in this episode, but I know like last episode he got to narrate David and Joe bonding about the milk. I'm like, Why do I care what Shauhin has to say about this? But he keeps showing up time and time again in those
Oh,
moments.
I thought that was a good confessional because I feel like you needed the opposition of that. Someone to just be like standard, like, this is stupid. Why do you guys drink so much milk? Like, I
Well,
thought someone at least needed to say it, but it was Shaheen. You're right. They
yeah.
showed him doing that. And that was probably one of the only times this season I feel like he's gotten like a funny or interesting confessional, to be honest. Um,
Well, this episode he got to sing the music. That was
oh,
hilarious.
that's true. I didn't find that funny, but you're right. He did do that.
um,
I thought
yeah,
that was
I don't
strange,
know.
but you're right. He did do that. That was something he did. Oh,
It was a big thing. So, anyways, that's the contenders. Now we can talk about predictions. Any other big predictions for general
mhm.
in the future and for specifically next week? Uh, do you have thoughts on who you
Yeah,
predict is going to be voted out next, or anything else?
I think Mitch is going. I said that earlier, and I feel like talking to you, I kind of convinced myself that's what's happening. I think they're trying to build Mitch up as this like threat that will win if he's at the end, and he also is at the bottom with no allies at this point. So when they all get back together, it's a tribe of 10. I feel like he's the easy target. And he uses his advantage, right? So he doesn't even
Yeah.
have that anymore. So yeah, I'm predicting next week is going to be pretty standard. I don't think you're even going to see like really breaking up of different tribes. I think the tendency in the new era is to try to keep this like large group that does splits the vote
Mhm.
as long as you can, and I just don't see this group like really splintering that much because people just want to play under the radar. They just want to survive one more
Mhm.
time, and they're like, there's someone easy that we can vote out, we'll just do that.
Mhm. I could see how Mitch is maybe being teed up in the way that like Charity was kind of teed up. That it was like we were hearing people wanting to vote out Charity in episode before it happened, and it was like, why do we need to hear about this right now when there's so much else going on? I was kind of thinking about this earlier this week, and I kind of think it now. I could see Mitch potentially as like a losing finalist or somewhere in that zone. Because I don't think he's a super high winner contender at the moment. But this did feel like there was a lot of talk about Mitch being at the end. And
Mm.
so I was like, maybe he does slip by and make it to the end, but he doesn't win for whatever reason.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't follow that because I feel like the content wasn't like him making it to the end. It was him winning at the end. And
That's true.
so I don't think they would show stuff like that because then it would kind of blindside the audience when he makes it to the end and doesn't win.
Hmm.
So either he like all of a sudden has great episodes here on out and he
Hmm.
wins, or he is put up as this big threat that will be targeted at some point. And it might not be next week. It might be all the way down to the final 5 where people get rid of him because he's a threat.
Hmm.
But I think he's leaving because he's a threat based on the edit we saw this week. And I think it's likely to happen next week just because I think these players are playing super
Hmm.
safe.
Yeah, I think that's a very good prediction. I think I'm going to take a wild spin. I'm going to think about the next time on Survivor that we saw at the end of the episode.
Mm.
We saw, a little bit of chaos. People saying, "Oh, David's causing chaos. He wants to vote out Kamilla," uh, because and Kyle's like, "Oh, I don't really want to do that." And we saw Chrissy throw out Joe's name. I believe it was to Kyle.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Uh, and so there's like a little bit of kind of shifting things there, and they're trying to make it seem like a tension. My thought is that Chrissy throws out Joe's name. She kind of wants to go for Joe. Joe catches wind of this, hears about this. I think that Joe is going to be a difficult person to vote out right now because I think he's pretty much got a solid 5 that's not going to vote him out in terms of original Loggy and David. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I think he's going to find out about this. Loggy is going to retaliate. They want to vote out Chrissy in response.
Yeah.
David,
I could see that.
he's throwing out Kamilla because maybe he finds out Kamilla lied to him or he thinks Camilla's a threat. And so then Kyle is going to have to make this decision of go with David's plan to vote out Kamilla, which he's not going to want to do, or stick with Loggy and maybe take out Chrissy, which is not the best option for him, but the better option than voting out Kamilla.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that we're gonna
You think
end
Chrissy's
up with a
going?
Chrissy vote. Uh,
Yeah, no, I could totally see that based on what we saw of the next week. I just, sometimes they put things out there just because they want to make us
I
think
agree.
something that's not at all happening. So, but you're right. Based on what we saw there, I could totally see Chrissy going. I think that's a super valid prediction. As far as like thinking longer term past the next episode, I'm curious to know because we have Shauhin currently at number one, and you made your case for Shauhin as the winner, but I want to know how he, I guess, breaks out of where he currently is to make it to the end and win. Because I think currently he's shown no confessional or anything saying I want to get rid of Joe and Eva, or I think Joe and Eva are threats. But I think it's clear no one can beat Joe or Eva at the end, and
Mhm.
currently he's working really closely with them. So while I don't see that happening next week, I'm curious if the following week, when it's final 9, and typically they have bigger moves, if either Joe or Eva gets blindsided because Shauhin flips.
I would not be surprised about that. I think we didn't see him say he wants to take them out, but we did see him say this episode that he's fine, working in this like big, strong person alliance. He says he said eventually those alpha people are gonna flip and they're gonna turn each other, and I'm gonna be the one that has to make the decision between them, something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And so I could see that's where the path leading to. Maybe like Kyle ends up turning, and maybe him and Joe go against each other, or something like that. And
Yeah.
Shauhin gets to decide.
Do
I
you have
think that
any long-term predictions here?
I think that it's honestly, I feel like that like group of like we don't know a whole lot about where Star is at, but it feels like the Logi are pretty tight. And
Yeah.
I feel like David is tight with Siva, but David is also really tight with most of the Logi. And so
Yep.
I find it hard to see how any of them get voted out right now. Uh, it's possible something crazy happens, the week after or at some
Yeah.
point.
Again, I'd
But
like more fluid gameplay, but so far they're not showing, they're showing everyone playing pretty safe.
yeah,
Like if you think about it, every vote since they have like come together has been the safest vote. Charity, say Cedrek,
yeah,
and Mitch is like very clearly like the bottom of this group of 10, and I'd say afterward is probably Star and Chrissy in some order.
yeah.
And so it's like I really hope it's not just like this big alliance is making it to the final 7 or final 6, but like it could be like that. And then I just don't really know really the pathways for certain players,
Mhm,
which is why I kind of think the players who depend more on their strategy than like their challenge performance need to make moves now.
mhm.
They need to pick up stragglers and they need to get rid of the bigger names before they don't have an opportunity to. Because like who knows? Maybe Eva will go on some challenge win streak, or Joe or David. Like
Mm.
again, these threats they can't just continue in the game if you're still trying to win as a Shauhin or as a Kamilla or even maybe as a Kyle. I don't
Yeah.
know.
It makes me wonder, and I kind of said this earlier, like, was this the moment for Kamilla and Kyle to take that shot
Mm-hmm.
on Shauhin, at least to break up that alliance a little bit?
Yeah,
Because it's going to be more and more difficult every week moving forward.
it will be. Yeah, 100%. So, yeah, I guess we'll see where things go. This was really fun. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me, Norm.
Thank you so much for being here. It was really fun to get some different perspectives. I love getting a little bit of pushback and some real time debate. I've had to debate some people in the comments before, so it's been
Yeah,
fun to get to like do it, you know, in person like this.
totally.
So yeah, any parting thoughts on the season or this episode from you?
I don't want to end on negativity, but honestly, this episode I didn't love, and the season I don't love. And my ride or die. Maybe I didn't say this earlier. Was Say I loved Say. I
Mm,
thought she brought the energy I needed into the show. I feel like too much of the new era has been this like kumbaya mindset of like we can't really have villains, we can't really have people stir the pot up, and even like when someone is presented sort of negatively, like I feel like Charity last week, the show kind of sanitizes it, so it doesn't even look like it looks like people don't like her, and that's it, and that's why they voted her out, which might be partly true, but like her exit interview, Charity was saying that she wanted to vote out Eva, but like no one was willing to do that
Mhm.
because of what had just happened with Eva. And that could have been presented in a more villainous way. And I feel like a version of Survivor of the past would have totally presented it that way, would have made Charity a villain. And instead, we got kind of like this, I don't know, weak edit for her. And so Say, I loved because I feel like the show really leaned into it. And I don't know if it's because they see some kind of like returnee potential in her, even though she didn't even make it to the jury, or if it was just like, this is the character and we want to highlight her. But now that Say is gone, my interest in the show is honestly a little bit waned. I will still watch the episodes, but like, I don't know. At this point, like my favorite is Mary. She has essentially no shot of winning the game. And this big alliance I just don't really love. And like I don't even know if it's like an individual thing, because I don't have strong feelings against David or Joe or anyone, but I just feel like when they're all together and they're talking about honor and integrity and like strength, it's so not interesting. It's not the show that like I fell in love with. And again, I just don't really gravitate to those characters. So I'm hoping that a shakeup happens. I'm hoping that some people can prove some more strategy. And I think there's potential for it. I'm not, throwing out this season. But right now, my ratings are dipping a little bit. And I'd say I'm feeling kind of how I felt like around 43, which was for me a season I didn't love. And so, yeah, we'll see where things go.
Yeah, I think my message to people that have been feeling very negative about the season, I think it's good to have like unique seasons with different vibes, and I feel
Yeah.
like I know that a lot of people aren't necessarily feeling the vibe of this season, but I know that players have talked about in the past that every season kind of develops a culture and how they play, and I feel like the culture of this season is very distinct in a very unique way. And we look at the past couple seasons, like 46 was like the chaos, and 47
Yeah.
was like the game bots. And so I think it's interesting to have a season that is very unique and very different than the last few seasons we've had. And so
Yeah.
maybe it's not your cup of tea, but it is someone's cup of tea, probably. And so I think it's fun to have difference in types of seasons. And I would recommend, if you want a different type of season, go watch Australian Survivor. That'll give you if you're not into American right now, there's other options out there. So
True. Good point. And even though I don't really love this season, I don't love this episode, we've been talking for it for over an hour. This is just proof that, like, we're huge Survivor fans. We're going to watch whatever's put out in front of us. And there's still interesting things to dissect and to, like, talk about and to really, like, disagree on.
Yeah.
That's been the most fun part of this whole, like, little video with you, is, like, disagreeing with your takes on Shauhin or Kyle or whoever. Just, like, I love this. And so thanks for having me on again. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you everyone so much for watching. We've had an absolute blast. Tune in next week to see thoughts on episode 8. And leave in the comments down below if you have any thoughts on this episode, our debate here today, or any predictions for the future. If we got anything wrong, we got anything right, and press the subscribe button to see stuff in the future. I've been North, and I'll see you all next time. Stay frosty.